Supporting conclusions with data. Key idea here is that in any well-done science experiment, there is a question being asked. The question needs to be answered using data collected during the experiment. That is why the written conclusion to an experiment must be supported with data, and that includes saying numbers in the sentence. Your task here is to first learn how to solve this sort of a problem, which I'll be teaching in this video. You need to learn to use the 4-step method to solve a problem and then support your conclusion with data. Now in this case, the question being asked is, how fast does a speeding blue convertible SUV drive? This information will come from the Explore Learning gizmo called Measuring Motion. And the 4-step method is summarized. The 4 steps that you will need to go through to solve this kind of a problem will involve ratio first, proportion, doing a solution, and then writing a conclusion sentence. Now, to understand these words, especially ratio and proportion, you're going to need to have learned some vocabulary, RURP, ratio, unit, rate, and proportion, because these 4 steps will enable you to take the information from the gizmo and do some math and thinking skills to them to come up with an answer, but you'll need to be able to understand the vocabulary that I'm using when I talk, so be sure you have studied the terms ratio, unit, rate, and proportion. Now, to get to the answer, you first have to have some data, and that data will come from the gizmo, and I have a couple of screenshots that I've taken from the gizmo. Here they are. The top screenshot up here is a before or a starting time picture, and the second screenshot at the bottom here is an after. And what's important in these 2 photos is that the Jeep is exactly lined up in a certain position. Where this arrow is pointing, where my blue arrow meets the large arrow, you can see that the little rear bar at the end of the SUV is matched up to this exact spot on the tree. And this is at 0.3 seconds. Now, some time passes, the car keeps driving and driving, and I took my next screenshot when the car was lined up exactly on the same spot on the tree with the bar at the back, exactly at the same location, and this is at 1.4 seconds. Now I'm going to be able to use this information to figure out a ratio. Now a ratio, in this case, is going to put distance in the numerator, and it's going to put time in the denominator. That's pretty typical for when you work with a ratio involving speed, is that the distance is in the numerator in the top and that time is in the bottom or the denominator. So first we've got to figure out the distance. The distance traveled here is that the vehicle went from this tree to this tree to this tree to this tree to this tree, and then is stopped here at this position. So we've got to figure out, using the information given, it says the distance between trees is 5 meters, so I can kind of count this out. It goes 5 meters, 10 meters, 15 meters, 20 meters. So I know what my distance is, 20 meters. Notice that I am putting the units here. It's very important that you use units with any of these measurements so you can keep track of what number means what. So 20 meters was the distance traveled. And then the time, that's going to take a little more work. The starting time, when the tree was lined up with the car here, was 0.3 seconds, and then after some time passed and the car had gotten to this tree, the time was 1.4 seconds. We're going to have to do just a little bit of math, and what I like to do is to call that the delta time. Remember that delta means change in, so it's going to be 1.4 seconds minus 0.3 seconds, and the reason is that that difference will tell us how long it took to travel from this tree to this tree. By subtracting, you get the difference. And the answer there is 1.1 seconds. So this car traveled 20 meters in 1.1 seconds. Now to set this up as a ratio, you usually are going to write the numerator as the distance, 20 meters, and then draw a vinculum right here, the fraction bar, and then you're going to put the time at the bottom, 1.1 seconds. So this is important because this is the information from the gizmo that now enables me to start solving the problem. Got to remember these numbers. We're going to carry them over to our worksheet. Here comes. Remember the first step in the ratio, unit rate, proportion, four-step method, number these and write them, is step 1 is to write the ratio. And in this case, the ratio, which we just got from the gizmo, was 20 meters in 1.1 seconds. Now, the problem that we face right here is that we could say, okay, good enough, done, but this denominator right here is not user-friendly. You would never say a car travels 20 miles per 1.1 hours because the denominator is just like weird to say something like a strange number, like a number with a decimal. What you really want is for this denominator to be 1. And if we can get this to be turned into a 1, then what we will have is a unit rate. So the goal is to convert this ratio into a unit rate, and these are the steps to do it. First step, write the ratio. Second step is to write a proportion. Now the proportion, the goal of the proportion is to figure out how to convert the ratio from 20 meters over 1.1 seconds into a unit rate where the denominator is 1. And here's how you do it. First, you write the original ratio, which is 20 meters over 1.1 seconds, and then, as you know, a proportion is when two ratios are equal. So I'm going to set it equal to another ratio, write a fraction bar here, and my goal is to get the denominator to be 1 second, because right now, recall, it's 1.1 seconds, not a convenient denominator for comparison purposes. So then I'm left wondering what is up here in this numerator, and so I'm going to write x as an unknown variable, and my goal is now to solve, and I think you probably have learned how to do this in earlier math grades, but I'm going to make sure that you remember all the steps and I'll talk you through it. This third step is the solution. It's also known as what you would call showing your work, and this is required. When you do this four-step method, if you're going to be assessed on it, you have to write out the names of the steps. You need to write out all the things, the ratio, the proportion, and the solution, showing your work, because that will show if you really understand the process. At some point in the future, you may decide to skip all these steps because you find a shortcut, and when that time comes, go ahead and skip the steps. But for this lesson, I'm asking you to learn how to do these steps in this exact order. When you solve a problem like this, do it just like this. All right, so now the solution step is going to involve trying to solve for x. And so we're trying to figure out what this x is. And the way to do that involves cross products or cross multiplication. You may remember this, again, as I said from earlier grades. Cross products or cross multiplication, sometimes drawn with this little butterfly symbol. And what it's saying is that this times this will equal this times this. It's sort of just a math trick. There's more fundamental background on why it works, but we're just going to skip that for now and just use it. Cross products or cross multiplication to solve for the unknown, in this case, the numerator over here. So I'm going to write out the steps. It looks like this. You write 20 times 1. Now notice here I'm leaving out the units when I do the solution step because it'll get kind of crowded if I keep those units in, but I'm going to need to put the units in again when I'm done. But you're allowed to leave the units out during this solving step just so it's a little bit cleaner looking. All right, so 20 times 1 will equal the other two numbers times each other, 1.1 times x. So just write that out. 20 times 1 equals 1.1 times x. And now this is an algebra question. All you have to do is solve to get x by itself, and then the number on the other side of the equal sign will be what x equals. All right, so I'm just going to write out the steps. 20 times 1 is 20 equals 1.1 times, I'll write that times there, 1.1x. I want to get x by itself, so I'm going to divide both sides by 1.1. Divide both sides by 1.1. And when you do that division, you'll find that 20 divided by 1.1 equals x. And all you have to do is punch that number in the calculator. And if you do it, I'll just encourage you to try it on your calculator right now. I happen to know what the answer is, and it turns out that x equals 18.1818 repeating. And I'm going to round that to an approximate that x, I'll put a squiggly equal sign for the approximate to show that I rounded, 18.1818. 0.2, and I'm going to add the units back in, meters per second. So that's how you do the solution. Now the last step, remember, is to write a conclusion, and this conclusion is going to be written as a sentence. So go ahead and write out the name of the step for conclusion. And at this point, you're taking the answer, which you figured out, but putting it into a sentence, and you want to bring it back to the original question. How fast does a Bleeding Blue convertible SUV drive? A good conclusion is going to restate the key words from this question and is going to answer them with this number that we have solved, which is now a unit rate. Here it comes. It is a blue speeding SUV. I'm going to shorten it. Travels 18.2 meters per second. I could put an approximately in there. Travels about 18.2 meters per second since I did round. Now, this is how you do the four-step method. And anytime you solve, you want to write each of these words numbered out. You want to write out all the steps just like I did. The only difference is you're going to have different numbers here, and of course your final solution will be different, which means your sentence will be different based on the problem you're solving. Number 3 here, where you're going to use the four-step method, you're going to write out steps 1 through 4 here, write out steps 1 through 4 here, using data that you collect from the gizmo to compare who's faster, a cheetah or an antelope. If you get stuck on any of the steps for how to solve the problem, what I recommend you do is rewind back into the video and rewatch the parts that need more explaining, and you want to use this right here as your model for how to solve. All right, I hope that helps explain it.